My name is Halley Potter. I'm a fellow at the Century Foundation. I'm co-author with Kimberly of the report, A New Wave of School Integration. And I want to thank Kimberly and Amy so much for their fantastic presentations on the research that is grounding the work on school integration, what we know about the benefits of diverse classrooms, and about some of the efforts currently going on to try to promote more diversity in our schools. So in our panel discussion, we're going to talk about how you translate some of that research into action. How do you engage all of the stakeholders that we need to actually make progress on meaningful school integration? How do you reach parents and students and teachers, school board members, superintendents, governors, state legislators, federal policymakers, all of the different people that we need in order to come up with policies and the will to implement them? And I think so often the first hurdle is making school integration actually a priority and addressing the issue of segregation. And in too many cases, we've seen that be where the conversation stops. In Pinellas County, Florida, about 9 years ago, the school board voted to move to a neighborhood schools model that dramatically resegregated the schools and sent many African American students in their district to high poverty, low performing schools. And when the paper asked school board members about this, they said that segregation is a nationwide thing, not just us, and didn't feel like there was any need to act. And we've seen in Seattle, after the 2007 US Supreme Court decision in the Parents Involved in Community Schools case struck down their racial integration program, the district was faced with a decision in terms of whether they would come up with other paths for diversity. And the chair of the school board there said, "It's not my job to desegregate the city." And even this last fall in New York City, the school's chancellor suggested that maybe an alternative to integrating schools by socioeconomic status could be to come up with pen pal programs where you pair together students from richer schools and poorer schools and give them a chance to write to each other. And although I'd be willing to entertain that idea as maybe having some merit, it's certainly not getting at the root of the problem. We do thankfully have a lot of examples of places where education leaders and parents and activists are stepping up and addressing segregation head on. In New York City at the same time, there were parents and principals at schools who fought for better enrollment policies that would increase socioeconomic diversity at those schools. And they won that fight, and the administration is starting to be more supportive of school integration efforts there. Similarly, in Eden Prairie, Minnesota, it took a school board member and a bunch of parents from the Somali refugee community to take a look at the school boundaries, figure out inequities, and come up with ways to move those boundaries to bring kids of different backgrounds together. And in Rhode Island, this work took the shape of having a mayor from an affluent town lead legislation that created new integrated interdistrict charter schools that were enrolling from lower income cities and from higher income suburban districts in the same schools. So their work can look a lot of different ways. Even when you come up with that will, I think there's still a number of challenges. There are political obstacles, there are logistical obstacles, and we're going to talk in this panel about both some of those challenges and some of the strategies that are the best ways we think to overcome them. So I am thrilled to have 5 fantastic panelists joining us for this discussion. I'll start here right to my right. Tanya Clay House is the Deputy Assistant Secretary for P-12 Education at the US Department of Education. And on my other side, Monique Lin-Luse is Assistant Counsel at NAACP's Legal Defense and Educational Fund. Donna Harris-Aikens is joining us from NEA, where she's the Director of NEA's Education Policy and Practice. Mohammed Choudhury is the Director of the Office of Transformation and Innovation at Dallas Independent School District. And Bill Ferguson is joining us as State Senator from Maryland's 46th Legislative District. We have folks coming from a number of different perspectives, and to start out our conversation, I have asked each of our panelists to respond to one opening question and a gentle reminder that we'll try to keep those responses to about 2 minutes so that we have time for audience questions as well. So Tanya, I'm going to start with you. Secretary King talked about some of the work that the department is doing to identify school diversity and try to push that work forward. But there are obviously a lot of limits to what the department alone can do. So can you tell us a little bit about who the other partners are that you are looking for to help advance this work?
Sure, and I see my 2 minutes, so I'll try to maintain to that. So first, I want to thank you for allowing us to come together today, and I'm really excited to be able to have this conversation. I think in terms of talking about who are the other partners, you see them up here on this panel. I mean, this is who the department needs. We need all of you out in the audience. One of the benefits that the Department of Education can bring to this issue is the ability to bring people together in order to ensure that people are actually having the conversations that are necessary to create these innovative strategies. We can provide the incentive, we can provide resources and opportunities in order to encourage this type of innovation. And I think that's what the department really can do. We're looking for partners, particularly in the advocacy community, for parents, for teachers, to actually take the initiative and be proactive, to join the school board, to learn more about the zoning laws and to understand exactly how things are determined within their school level. I think it's really great to know that there are so many of you out in this audience today, parents, teachers. I've looked at the list of RSVPs and it's pretty expansive. I'm glad to see people here from my county, Fairfax County. I have a child who's attending school there. Garfield, if anybody, okay. So the point is that we need all of you here in order to help advance this work. And I think it's really important, particularly also, I see here Senator Bill Ferguson from Maryland, to also have partners within the legislature, because in order to, it takes both. It takes both the federal incentivizing, but also on the state level to encourage that type of resource allocation and ensure that there's opportunities that are provided on the school level so that we can work both in the state and the district level to create these types of changes. And so I encourage and really support the ability for all of us to come together, and I think the department will continue to do that as we've been doing out throughout the country and trying to talk more about this issue and say that this really needs to be a priority when you're talking about equity, because just simply saying that we're going to have diversity for diversity's sake defeats the purpose. Yes, we're a diverse country, and we need to have diverse representation in all aspects. But diversity is about equity and ensuring that there's an opportunity within our classrooms. And so I'm specific when I say it's not just about diversity in the schools, it's diversity in the classrooms as well, because I heard the comment about how you might have segregation within the schools. So we're encouraging everybody, all the partners, everybody who recognizes these types of changes and those challenges to actually come to the table, and that's what Stronger Together promotes in terms of making it community-led and locally driven. So everybody up here and everybody out in the audience and everybody in the public and everywhere needs to come together in order to promote this change.
Great. So Monique, I'll turn to you. That NAACP LDF has obviously been a leader in the legal fight for school desegregation for years now. But it's more than 60 years since Brown v. Board, and particularly when we look at school demographics since 1980s and the resegregation that has happened in many parts of our country. Can you tell us about to what extent legal desegregation is still a part of this conversation and how that fits together with some of the voluntary efforts that we're talking about?
Absolutely. At the Legal Defense Fund, there are approximately 300 or so estimated open desegregation cases. So these are cases that there are school districts around the country who are still under court oversight. LDF has a little less than 100 of those cases. Obviously, as you can imagine, the amount of resources it would take to constantly to be addressing those are tremendous. But I think what's amazing about school desegregation cases is that the level of court oversight goes beyond just student assignment into schools, but addresses things as relate to quality of education, school discipline, the assignment of faculty and staff, classroom diversity across programs within a school. And so the ability that we have through these court orders and through the federal court system is to really look all the way through the school's operations to ensure that it's being operated in a racially equitable and sort of a race-conscious way that leads towards that equity equity that's necessary. It also gives us the ability to look at inequalities today and understand them through a legal lens as the way that we understand them through a sort of common sense lens, that they're vestiges of prior discrimination, right? That it's not that today there's inequity that sort of popped up out of nowhere, but rather it has a legacy. And in school desegregation cases, that legacy is a part of how we view the cases. When we think about voluntary integration, one of the goals of school desegregation litigation is to leave a school district in a position where there is both political will and that there is also an expectation and methods that would be able to continue post-unitary. So once it's no longer under court supervision, that a school district has the tools and also the community has the expectation that they should be going to racially equitable schools. So we look to sort of many of the voluntary sort of methods and tools that are discussed in the reports that were discussed earlier as the kinds of things that can extend past unitary status.
Great. And Donna, I want to turn to you. So NEA has helped to bring attention to this issue, including in comments that you all submitted regarding the Every Student Succeeds Act this fall. Tell us a little bit about why this is an issue that NEA cares about and how it's an issue that affects your core group of teachers.
Good morning. So part of why we support this effort and have for many years is that our members, not just teachers, but education support professionals, the specialized staff, higher ed staff and faculty, their focus is on the kids. They know that when kids are in diverse classrooms, diverse schools, they get to know each other, they are better for it, their classrooms are better for it, and it just makes for a more interesting and challenging and diverse experience for all involved, not just the kids, but also the educators in the school. And part of the mission statement at National Education Association includes a commitment to making sure that students are prepared for a diverse and interdependent world. And they take that very seriously. So it's not just about making sure that they have learned the academic part of being in school. Part of public education is supposed to be about preparing them for life. So it includes all of that. And so I think it is important to make sure that we remember, several panelists have mentioned it already, it is not just a school effort if you want to integrate schools. There are other pieces of the community that need to be involved. And quite frankly, if you want them to be committed to the effort, which you do, then you've got to bring them in on the front end. All of the ideas for helping public education don't happen within the public education system. Mm-hmm. It is definitely needs to be a community event, a community strategy, a community commitment, quite frankly. And so I'm glad to see the diversity of roles up here on the panel and that we've heard this morning, because it's going to take not only all of us, but more than who's in the room to make this a reality. And we can certainly fix this generation if we so choose.
It's a good transition into talking to two people who are involved in this work on the ground. Mohammed, I want to start with you. Tell us about the work that Dallas is doing to create more opportunities for socioeconomically integrated schools and how that work started and became a priority.
Sure. So Dallas has 3 big priorities it has committed to really drive achievement in the next few years. And one of those 3 things is our public school choice initiative. With our public school choice initiatives, one of the things we want to do is launch 35 new choice schools by 2020, and it was tied to our bond that successfully passed in November as well. A subset of the 35 choice schools are going to be these 8 to 10 transformation schools, and these are open enrollment schools that are really going to allow us to pilot better and smarter approaches to teaching and learning, as well as how we do attendance zones as well. And so one of the things that we were really excited about early on in this is, let's make sure that as we launch these schools, that we make them integrated. And how do we actually have an intentional focus to do that? And so one of the things that we did is, as we launched these transformation schools, we made sure that we piloted different approaches to see if we can have better ways to bring families from all over the city together. So one of the things we did was we had priority radii around when we launched these schools. So for the way I describe these radii is that they're smarter attendance zones, right? When you draw a circle around a school, you can either typically draw it around the residential segregation that exists, Dallas, and Dallas has high levels of segregation, as you already know if you've looked at the research. Or you can draw a circle that encompasses the most affluent communities as well as the most disadvantaged communities. And that's one way we went about it. Another way we went about it, and this is the school I really want to talk about, one of our transformation schools launching this August, is actually doing a weighted admissions lottery. And so Solar Preparatory School for Girls, it's a single gender STEAM school, K-8 school, launching with 198 kids this fall. We actually codified within our regulations where 50% of the seats would be given to families who qualify for free and reduced lunch, and the other 50 for families who do not. When we first proposed that, the district, including the leadership, thought we were crazy. Is Dallas ready for this? I mean, when are you ever ready for this? Dallas is ready for this. I mean, families are moving from all over the place. We were told, the chief from my office was told that we might get sued, and our office thought that would be the most amazing thing if we got sued, so we can confront this issue. So we pushed on, and so that's one thing. We were relentless about it. We put forth a citywide effort in terms of recruiting everything from door knocking to an expensive ad to making the application process very easy. Download it, take a picture, text it to us. And we recently confirmed all the seats, all the 198 seats, and we have successfully gotten families to voluntarily choose from our most advantaged census blocks and disadvantaged census blocks to go to school together. And we have wait lists long on both sides, the 50% free and reduced lunch side, as well as the non-50%, the side that don't qualify. And so that's one thing that we are doing. Our public school choice initiative has really allowed us to explicitly focus on attendance and how we do attendance at our schools in a way that promotes socioeconomic diversity.
Great. And Bill, you're working at the state level. You've recently sponsored legislation that would help create a state entity to support these efforts. Tell us about that and the role what it looks like when you're operating at that state level.
Sure, and thank you for having me here and on this amazing panel of great folks, and for folks in the room. I think it's a statement in and of itself that this gathering of this size can happen. I think the moment is right now to move on this critically important issue. So very briefly, I could talk about this all day, but I'll try to hold up a bit. As of about, I guess, 6:46 p.m. Last Monday, we passed in Maryland on the last day of the General Assembly session the Maryland Education Development Collaborative, also known as EDCO. What the collaborative is an instrumentality of the state. It's not, it is wholly independent, so it's not a part of the State Department of Education. It's not a part of a district. It is an independent entity with a board of governors that will focus exclusively on how 21st century learning can enhance socioeconomic diversity. The board members are intentionally diverse, so we have sort of the traditional educational players, so the boards of education, your teachers' unions, your superintendents, teachers, parents, but we also have private industry, folks from the Department of Commerce, that will be looking at how we can use this moment in time of a globalized world where the economic advantages of the future can be matched with the educational priorities of today. And this is the moment for that to happen. So, the real question is, can we do this without a lawsuit? And I think, when you look at a statewide effort to integrate, and in a district like Baltimore City, where about 86% of the students qualify for free and reduced lunch meals, if we do socioeconomic diversity in Baltimore City, it means we're inherently creating more segregation in other parts of the district. So you have to broaden the scope of enrollment. And that is really tough, and it takes bringing a lot of people together to figure out the logistics, the politics, the funding. And so this entity, EDCO, when it's launched and we've got money in the budget, will be the organizing entity to figure out how to do this in Maryland at scale.
So, we've talked a lot about the benefits of diversity and some exciting new efforts going on. I want to make sure that we do address some of the very real challenges which have already come up in conversations. But I'll open it up to all of our panelists. What are the things about actually implementing school diversity strategies that are the hardest? And are there ways to help overcome some of those obstacles?
So since I deal with school districts that are probably the most intractable in the country, just by way of example, just signed a consent order between the Department of Justice, LDF, representing Black families, students, and teachers in the community in Louisiana, along with the school board, that would agree actually to integrate a school that has not been integrated since it was built in 1936. And it took court intervention. The community and the leaders of that school board, through a lot of negotiation and intense conversations and an understanding of the expectations of that school district, came on board and really rose to the occasion. But I think, some of the challenges are people are very used to doing things the way they like to do things, right? People like to rely on, it's personal choices and it's just a bunch of individuals making individual adult choices, when the reality is that there are systems and governments have made choices that lead to the sort of segregation that we see, and in order to resolve that, that requires big, hard choices and movements from school boards. And so one of the things that we're very grateful for are the sort of incentives that were described earlier through things like Stronger Together, which we hope will also lead a focus in on racial integration and not just looking at economic integration, but also the Magnet Schools Assistance Program, that those kinds of tools and incentives that come from the federal government really do make a big difference in the school districts that I work with, to encourage them to sort of see that they need to get on the trend towards integration and sort of move out of what is sort of the status quo.
And I'll add that I think it's also important to understand the broader challenges that confront districts as they're trying to engage in these strategies. I think we've heard some about the importance of considering how housing is zoned within the area, also understanding the transportation options. Secretary King mentioned his ongoing conversations with Secretary Castro, as well as ongoing conversations with Secretary Jackson. And we're trying to understand and figure out how we can engage in some type of interagency collaboration. And this is something that we recognize is important, but I think it's incredibly important for everybody to understand this on all levels, not just the federal level, but also within the state and local level, because as you're considering how it is that you're going to engage in these strategies, we do need to consider what is happening within our housing patterns. I mean, we see that as I continue to see houses built up within certain communities, and you're right, you see certain single-family homes that are being built out. You kind of know when they say the housing starts at $750,000. It's like, well, I know who's going into that housing complex. Whereas it's a bit difficult to conceive of how we're going to engage in some comprehensive strategies if you're not considering all of these different issues. Similarly, I think we need to make sure that we are identifying the transportation challenges, not simply placing schools in areas that only select individuals can get to. If you're looking at the public transportation options and metro, whether or not they're metro accessible, really appreciating how it is you need to bring together all these different types of communities, and that's what we're trying to incentivize within Stronger Together, and we're trying to encourage on the ground.
I think another big thing, so the transportation issue was a big deal. So before we even launched, we said choice without transportation is not choice. So we have been able to prioritize that initiative. We learned from, looking at places like Denver. When you look at their recent report, they've had a choice system for a while now. A lot of families in the most disadvantaged census blocks kept opting back into the neighborhood school, whether it was struggling or not. So that was one big piece. I think the other piece is making sure kids from our most disadvantaged census blocks actually get to go to these schools. And so last year, there was a great piece on Ed Week with Catherine Lamont from the Office of Civil Rights on there talking about equity audits. And we said we need to have an equity audit in place into our enrollment science for transformation schools. And so we did it. And so what we did was we made sure after we conducted the lottery and accepted the families that at least 25% of the seats came from families from our most disadvantaged census blocks. And the way we did that is we did what Chicago did with Mr. Kallenberg, where they took the entire city and divided it up into census blocks and gave each census block a socioeconomic score based on factors like median income, home ownership, given the strong correlation they have with SES, and so we did that. So, and I'm proud to say that the first part of the challenge to integrating schools, that we were able to hit 25%, what we call tier 3 and 4, inter-solar prep. But really the hard work's going to start after the bell rings, right? One of the things we did was we visited schools nationally that were diverse, and you see kids, grouping themselves with their own race. Now that's an innocent act by them that eventually translates into other things. So how do you counteract that? So both looking at curriculum, teaching tolerance, facing history in ourselves. But the other thing is, as a district, and we're currently in the middle of designing a school performance framework. So as you assess these schools, assess how good they are in terms of integrating the kids as well. Because you can easily have a 50-50 school where 50% of the kids are on the top floor and 50% of the kids are on the bottom floor. And that's a problem. And so we're looking at a whole child accountability framework that looks at discipline rates, access to high quality curriculum. Are the classrooms integrated at the 50-50 level? Are the groups integrated at that level? So that's a very important challenge that's going to start as soon as the bell rings in August.
I'd like to double down on that. I have school-age kids now. One of the things that my husband and I looked at, and I told my husband, when we were looking at schools, I informed him, was the data. Yeah. When I went to school, my school was integrated, but my classes were not. So I was always one of two in my honors classes, kids of color, in the entirety of my high school career, in my core classes. And my parents went to segregated high schools, K-12, in Virginia. I also went to school in public school in Virginia. We are within this generation of having these issues. And so my kids go to school, their classes are integrated, their schools are integrated, but I can go back home and see classes that are still not integrated. And I think it is so important not to lose sight of the systems and structures that are in place, that regardless of how they got there, we have to fix it. Equity and opportunity are not conversations about charity. It's about equity, it's about opportunity. It's making sure that kids have what they need, making sure they're getting the education that they deserve, and that they can do it if they're given the opportunity, if they are prepared for it. And again, it's not enough to go to the same school. You have to learn how to work together, how to learn together, how to argue together in productive ways, how to have civil debates about all kinds of issues. And I think if we take a step back, look at where you are today in your schools, and for those who may not have been in a school lately, I encourage you to go and look around. See not only what the school looks like, but look at what the classrooms look like and see where the kids are during the school day. Not just at lunchtime, which I suspect, like Sunday morning, is not as diverse as we would all like to see, but are the classrooms actually integrated? Are kids actually learning how to work together, not just individually around each other, but as part of a team? And that is a huge part of what we need to be making sure kids leave school with, those skills, to work with people who are not like them, to be able to have conversations with people who are not from their same background, not from their same neighborhood, not from their same street. So I think if now is the time, as we've discussed all morning, if we can't figure this out in this generation, we will continue, I suspect, to be having this conversation for many decades to come. But the stars are aligned right now. You've got the federal government interested, you've got states who are interested, you've got neighborhoods, mayors, all kinds of folks who are interested. I think we can do this time. And I think it is up to all of us to make sure it gets done.
So I want to bring up a tension that Secretary King raised in his remarks, this false dichotomy that we sometimes have between saying poverty doesn't matter or poverty is everything. And I think this comes up when you're talking about school integration, because if you are advocating for diverse schools as an education strategy that can help reduce achievement gaps and broaden opportunity, you have to balance that with the fact that we still have so many high poverty schools that need so many more resources. So as a practical matter of budgets, as a political matter of how you have this conversation, what are strategies for holding both of those goals at the same time?
So I was going to, on the challenges too, I mean, I
Yeah,
think that money is an issue, and it will continue to be an issue. And I think the only way that we overcome it is to move away from this false choice. And I think also in the integration movement, we have to be very intentional about not talking from a deficit model. You know, that integration is an opportunity in and of itself. It's not only to fix a historic problem. And I would also, the reason that this bill passed in Maryland, and I think I was able to make the case that segregated schools aren't just bad for low-income students and minority students. It's also bad for enclaves of suburban, white, wealthy students who are not getting access to the benefits of a collaborative and diverse learning environment. And so I think all students do benefit. The problem is we don't really measure that very well. We measure a PARCC test for algebra, and that's great, and we should, but the ability to collaborate and learn through experiences and have empathy and learn from somebody else's cultural differences, you know, that's not something we measure well, and so we have to figure out a way to show, not only in the anecdotal sense why it's good for all students, but also sort of in the more data-driven sense that all kids lose out when we continue a segregated enrolled district or school or state.
I think to go to your question, I think it's important that, you know, we talk about it in the context of school turnaround. And I know Secretary King recently they're literally taking comments on whether or not SIG should embed this, and I think absolutely. I think the other piece is, I think reformers or stereotypical reformers have slept on this for a very long time. One of our campuses recently got a new school venture fund grant, and they've begun to embrace, you know, that component of the school, that SES diversity is a way to close the achievement gap. And I think we've been very intentional about talking about that it's not just, you know, a way to just create choice. It's a way to help drive achievement district-wide. We need proof points first, but I think the reform community can do a better job and needs to step up to make this front and center. It's not just about charter schools, about smarter charter schools. It's not just about teacher evaluations. It's about teacher evaluations in integrated schools. I think that's a big one. As a former teacher, I think that's something that's been overlooked. And so for us, we've been very key as we talk about a district that we want to become, that public school choice is our school turnaround strategy as well too. And so I think that's been a big part of making sure that it's not an either or, you talk about them equally.
You know, I also think there's, you know, one of the issues we think about segregation, and when we call it that, is that we tried separate and equal, right? That's something was a practice this country did for a long time, and it was very unsuccessful. And it was unsuccessful not just because people weren't having the opportunities to work in a diverse environment in 21st century and all of that, but also because when you have separate institutions, you also have sort of separate constituency bases, right, that are moving towards, you know, what expectations are for those institutions. And one of the reasons why, you know, we really believe in integrated education at LDF is because when students go to school together, the expectations of those schools meet everyone's expectations, right? It's not just those are okay schools for those people over there, but no, this is where we all go to school, and so these schools have to rise to that challenge. And one of the things, the conversations I've been having more in some of our more metropolitan school districts that we work in is that you can have, you know, your students today could be the next suburb students tomorrow, could be you know, someone else's the next year, right? That kids move, right? And then also that the human capital that you're building in your community that's going to draw businesses and job creators and all of that, they have to believe that your entire community, not just your one really enclave suburb, is going to be able to produce, you know, good employees, right? They have to believe that you're preparing sort of a college preparatory and a career-ready workforce across your metropolitan area. And so I think that the more we think about how to, the sort of interdependence and between communities, and also the less, I think, while there are still lots of places where race and class overlap very, very distinctly, there are lots of places where it doesn't, right? Particularly a lot of like new sort of the emerging suburbs and entering suburbs, right? There's a real shift in what we think of as being traditionally, you know, middle class and versus traditionally lower class, or, you know, in race, it requires a little bit more nuance, which is why it's it's particularly important to be looking at race and class as sort of interdependent, but distinctly, so that you're able to really address both issues at the same time.
Great. We'll move to questions from the audience.
Hi, I'm Eileen Kugler, and I work with diverse schools on building equity in their policies. And I had the good fortune to hear Secretary King yesterday, too, at a meeting that looked very different than this. It was a group of incredible parent leaders from immigrant and refugee communities. And they were brought there because of the intentionality of leaders, some of whom are in this room, who have worked very hard at building leadership in those communities. Some of them were here with interpreters. Some of them had spoken English in their own countries. And what I'm hoping is that those two groups don't remain separate. These are powerful, powerful voices for the strengths of diverse schools where many of their children attend, and if you listen to them, they feel marginalized. They are not valued for their strengths. It is a deficit model that's being run. They have risen up and they have voices that can champion diverse schools, that can inform the discussion of how do we build diverse schools. One quick example, one gentleman, a father from Nigeria who speaks with an accent, an African accent, grew up speaking English, and talked about fighting the move to have his kids in ESOL programs because he had an accent. We're talking at that level. If you haven't lived those experiences, you don't know those experiences. So I am just urging you to connect and value parent leaders, leaders in poverty, leaders from immigrant communities, leaders from all the racial communities. Bring them up to this level and be part of the discussion.
Can I speak to that?
Yes.
I appreciate that comment. And I wanted to also bring another issue to the forefront that we haven't talked about that I think is important with what was just raised, which is the need, as we talk about developing comprehensive strategies, we also need to ensure that as we're bringing students together, we're also bringing more a diverse workforce together as well. And that as you're looking at the strategies and creating these, developing new ways in order to ensure that you're providing equity within the classroom, you also have to train the teachers and provide that cultural competency, professional development training in order to ensure that they also understand how to best create those types of opportunities within the classroom for all types of students. And I think that that's something that we lay out within Stronger Together, that this is not simply, again, this is not a one-size-fits-all, that it really depends on what districts you're looking at and how it is and that they are structured. And we need to consider all of these types of things, curriculum development, as we say, you know, looking at ensuring that we have all stakeholders at the table. And so to your point about engagement, I think it's very true that we need to ensure that it's not a select type of parents or stakeholders that are at the table, that it's all type within the community. And I think it's up to us to try to ensure that that actually happens. And so I'll make one plug for something that's going on right now, because we're talking about the President's budget proposal and Stronger Together, and we really need, obviously, the continued support and movement of this appropriations bill. At the same time, there are opportunities in order to incentivize and create the dynamic for increased diversity in schools and ensuring that you're thinking about all these indicators within our accountability systems. We've got a new bill, the Every Student Succeeds Act, where there are opportunities, there are requirements for meaningful consultation for parents, for teachers, for everyone to be at the table, but most people don't realize that. And I think that these are times, like that's another opportunity to actually bring this issue to the forefront. And I encourage everybody, as you're thinking out loud about the strategies, that we also consider what is also the other opportunities beyond a new program, that it's what programs exist right now, and that's what we're trying to encourage in the programs that the department has, but also bringing new programs to the table to help move districts forward.
Great.
Hello, everyone. My name is Quentin Liggins. I'm with Leading Educators here in Washington, D.C. As a former low-income student who had the great privilege of going to very diverse schools in Minneapolis, Minnesota, I had the great opportunity to go to bar mitzvahs, was participated in a quinceañera, also hung out with one of my affluent white friends at his country club in suburban Minneapolis. All of that, all of those decisions were intentional decisions by the students and their families to integrate me into their life. So what you guys have articulated beautifully about policy changes and how we best engage on a national and state level of creating spaces where diversity can take place. My question to all of you is, how do we create those spaces on an interpersonal level? Because proximity does not connote connectivity. And for those of us who live in Washington, D.C., we can walk through DuPont Circle and see higher income families and lower income families not connecting at all, but sitting on the same bench. So as we look to work with our students to ensure that they can have all those skills which were outlined in the lovely report, we need to ensure that they're connecting, and not when they get to the classroom, they're sitting separately. Not when they get on the bus to go home, they're listening to different music, they're eating different foods, and there's not that cultural exchange. So I feel very fortunate that I had those experiences, but I realize those experiences aren't indicative of the experiences that all my colleagues and friends have had throughout their life. So I would love to hear your thoughts on how do we make sure that proximity does equal connectivity. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just say a short note that one concrete example of something that some schools are doing that I think is really interesting is starting strategic play dates and extracurricular activities. There's a school in Brooklyn where teachers from kindergarten through third grade assign groups of students who they think are coming from different neighborhoods and not necessarily likely to spend time outside of school, and create structured activities for those students and their parents to come together. And so thinking about how you create spaces for the experiences that you described that happen organically, how do you make sure that those happen at a greater scale? Any other ideas from?
I think as we head towards launching this campus that I described, the school leadership team right now with strategic play dates, they're having strategic meetups with the parents from across the city. As you know, the school doesn't have an attendance zone, so people are coming from all over. So the very first one is coming up at the end of this month at the Dallas Arboretum, but the idea is all these cultural institutions exist, and so before the first bell rings, let's make sure the parents have interacted. So that's one piece, and let's make sure that that doesn't stop after, when the year starts. But the other piece is when you look at traditional school site structures for parent engagement. So every school in Texas has to have a SBDM, a site-based decision-making committee, but the school also has an advisory committee. They're very intentional about making sure that seats are reserved for the demographics of the school, that you actually have a representative who represents, student backgrounds. Because what traditionally happens, and it's already kind of happening, some of our parents have already gotten the cell phone of our principal, and they want to take over the parent committee, and some of our parents want to push for a talented and gifted wing. No, we're not doing that. And so, what we think is a naturally good thing that has historically done a lot of harm, those things just come out and you have to be vigilant. And I think the school has been, and knowing also that we on our end are designing a school performance framework that has indicators that looks at that level of engagement is going to be important too, because what gets measured and valued gets acted upon, right, and reflected upon. So I think that's a big one. So continuing that will be a big deal as we go ahead and launch this school and beyond.
One of the things that is interesting in some of the school districts that I work with is ones that do exactly what you've described, where like school leadership takes a real sort of a bit of a heavy hand in sort of managing sort of parental social norms, right? Because like PTOs and PTAs, as many of you all know, can become sort of like a, it's a social club, right, for parents, and sort of gives them their social status in many places, right, or gives them their sort of, their way of relating to other adults, and less about how they could be sort of as integrated, as open as possible. And what I've seen is when principals and when school leaders really make a decision to go to their PTOs, go to their PTAs, and say, look, why doesn't this reflect our school, right? Like, where are these other parents? And push back on the initial response is going to be, oh, well, they're just not interested, right? Or like they just don't want to. When oftentimes, if you just take one step beyond sort of your initial ideas of what what the sort of assumptions are, but what those barriers are, oftentimes you can find lots of ways for parents to participate. And one specific example I have is some school districts I know that oftentimes will hold, say for instance, school board meetings, and the same place where you go for warrants and tickets, right? And so that's sort of in some ways, and requiring a lot of ID to be shown in order to go to meet at your school with your child, where if people have sort of varying immigration statuses or people have different relationships with law enforcement, that can be a real chilling effect that, if you're not even thinking about it, you've really iced out a large portion of your parents who would otherwise want to be involved. But if you could just make a small switch to meeting at the library instead of the sheriff's office, right, you see a much larger number of people who are coming to participate.
I would agree, and I would also say that there is, that's just funny to me. It's true, it's like a little story. Schools have to take responsibility for making sure that those engagement points actually happen. So you cannot just leave it up to, much as I love PTAs and PTOs, you can't leave it up to that particular body to make sure that families actually are literally near each other at any point in time. And so you have to, and it depends on the local context. So if you know your parents can't be there at 11 a.m. On a Saturday morning, that's not when you hold, that's not where when you primarily hold your parental and family engagement activities. If it's before school, if it's after school, if it is in the middle of the day for whatever reason, whenever it is, you want to make sure that your school and your school site are welcoming to families and, quite frankly, to kids. If the kids feel comfortable together, they will, I know, when I spend my free time, it's because my kids are badgering me like, I want to go, fill in the blank. If they don't want to go, it might cross my mind and it might not. So you want to make sure that your schools are welcoming for kids, for families, for the community. And I think if you fix or make sure that you are focused on those strategies and make sure that when you are building your school plans, your school improvement plans, your beautification plans, whatever it is, if those parts are already in the plan, it makes it a little bit of a less of a heavy lift to try and force fit it later. And so families will feel part of the community. They won't feel like they have to make an appointment to walk in the door every day. And they will want to be part of the effort. And they will want their kids to know each other because they know, the parents know each other.
So the only thing I'd very quickly add is that I think, one, you're 100% correct. And that we have to be thinking that there's, there are two key pillars here. One is the structures and the systems that allow for integration. The transportation, the zoning, all of the laws, the things that said it. But the programming is equally as important, and the programming has to match the structure. I've become enamored really with this school out in California, High Tech High, where for an entire quarter, it was a group of 6 students, and their entire quarter was based on building a guitar amplifier for $10 or less, and they had that was the semester for their physics class. And it was 6 students of diverse nature, and there's a young student who wrote a blog about his experience through this, and it was amazing. And the kids kids get together. They know how to work together well when given the right supports to do that. And so the programming is just as important as the proximity, as you referred to it. And so we can't forget one or the other. They're both essential.
Great. We'll take one more question and a quick response from our panelists.
Morning. I'm Massey Rich. I'm with Teach for America. And as I look at the title of the day, Taking Action on School Diversity, I'm thinking, well, how do we get beyond the nearly 100 school districts that have these policies in place and priorities in place to closer to something like the 14,000 school districts that we have in America? And when we make change in this system, we do it by having clear goals often, right? If we were taking action on childcare standards, we would have a clear set of standards. If we were thinking about how to prepare our students for STEM careers, we would have a set of standards to talk about. Or for workforce readiness, we would have a clear set of goals there. And I feel like on this topic, we don't really have a clear set of goals because diversity is so often in the eyes of the beholder. For some people, it's, well, if they look different than me, then it's diverse. Or I want someone with just a little less income than me, or a little more, but not a whole lot more. Or I really want to have people who come from different heritages and languages in their homes with me. Or I want our school to look like the city. Or I want our school to look like the country. Or I want our school to look like the future country. So I wonder from the panel, with all your diversity of perspectives, both as individuals and representing the groups you do, is there any more articulation we could put to the goal that we're shooting for that makes a diverse school, and not just leave it as, you know it when you see it?
Yeah, and I'll say, my colleague Kimberly mentioned in her presentation, we used as a really big rule of thumb looking at districts where enrollment had no single racial or ethnic group bigger than 70% and where there was no greater than 70% low income. A rule of thumb that grows out of some of the research around school desegregation and critical mass, that when you have representation of less than 30% of a minority group, that there can be a risk of feeling isolated. That was a very broad, blunt tool, and I think you're right that you have different definitions, different places. Curious if anyone has reflect on the definitions you've used.
We chose 50%, there isn't a set mandate, right? But you can actually go higher in some places, but we chose 50%, that's where the research we felt like pointed. I think in terms of one big indicator is gonna be make sure the classrooms are integrated, right? And then what measures exist to ensure that that's there in terms of socioeconomic diversity. And so for us, the 50% was the number we chose. Could we try 60 next time, maybe 40? We'll see. But I think the bigger piece is going to be the level of integration within the classroom and learning experiences down to the groups of 4 you create, or the pair, right? So there's that piece right there. So just in terms of norming, right, making sure that we have the tools and structures in place to make sure that the actual learning experiences that happen day to day are integrated. So for me, I would start there. Make sure that we have that as a really key core criteria, and I would hope that's a criteria within the Stronger Together grant that we plan to go after.
And when
So in terms of 50% in terms of socioeconomically integrated classroom, yes. Now, we don't shy away from conversations about race, but we do know that. So I do want to talk about the racial breakdown of this school, and it happened voluntarily. So it is 40% Hispanic. I'm averaging up 40% Hispanic, 30% white, 30% black. That just doesn't happen, right? Other than when we were under the desegregation order. So I think a big important part of that is our engagement efforts were very important, but also that equity audit piece that we did, where we made sure that if we did not have 25% of the seats representative of our most disadvantaged census blocks, then we would have missed out on racial integration too, because unfortunately in Dallas, overrepresentation, right, in terms of certain groups are in our most highly impoverished areas. So we made sure that those seats were protected, that they were sacred, that we would actually skip the wait list and we would actually give them the privilege to have those seats, right? So that's an important piece too for us too. Yeah.
I know you want to cut me off.
Can you say it in 2 sentences?
Courts have a rule in school desegregation cases that you need to be plus or minus 15, some places say 20, I say 15, plus or minus 15 the district average at each school. Sometimes it's a different percentage for faculty and staff, but that's what in faculty staff, you go a little bit to the wider applicant pool or employee pool, but that's what they use there.
Great. Yeah, so we don't have one answer on that, but we have a lot of, that was great. So I just want to take a quick minute. We are out of time. I know there would be so many more questions. I want to drill back to something that Donna mentioned, where she said, I think we could, in our lifetime, in this generation, make real progress on this issue. Over the past 2 decades, we've seen economic segregation between schools within the 100 largest school districts in this country grow by more than 30%. In the next 2 decades, maybe we could reverse that trend. It's really exciting to hear about some of the efforts that are going on across the country, some that are just starting, some that have been engaged for decades now. I just want to thank you all so much for coming, and I hope that you stay engaged with Century Foundation for future research and events. And to all of our speakers today and to our panelists on the stage, please join me in thanking them for a really rich discussion.